He wasn't supposed to vanish. That's what makes this case so unsettling. Because everything about that night felt ordinary. A group of college friends, a weekend trip, loud music, drinks flowing. The kind of night thousands of students have every single day and walk away from without consequence. But for rileystrain, that night didn't end with laughter or hangovers or stories to tell the next morning. It ended with silence and a mystery that still doesn't sit right. Because somewhere between being kicked out bar and walking down a brightly lit street, Riley disappeared completely. No struggle, no clear evidence, no answers, just a timeline that slowly unravels into something far more disturbing. Rileystrain was a 22-year-old college student. By all accounts, he was the kind of person people naturally gravitated toward. Easygoing, friendly, the type who blended into any crowd but was never ignored. In March 2024, he traveled to Nashville, Tennessee, with fraternity brothers for a weekend trip. It was supposed to be simple. Music, drinks, brotherhood, the kind of escape young men take before life gets more serious. On the night of March 8th, Riley and his group headed to downtown Nashville, where neon lights spill across the streets and live music pours out of every doorway. Crowded bars, packed sidewalks, a city alive. They eventually made their way into a well-known bar along Broadway, one of those places where people lose track of time. And that's where things started to shift. Not dramatically, not violently, just subtly. At some point during the night, staff inside the bar made a decision. Riley had to go. Accounts suggest he appeared intoxicated, maybe too intoxicated. Security escorted him out. But here's where the timeline becomes critical. Because Riley didn't leave with his friends. He didn't wait. He didn't call anyone. He was simply removed, alone, into a city that was still loud, but suddenly much more dangerous. Surveillance footage later captured what happened next. And at first glance, it seems almost reassuring. Riley is seen walking, not running, not stumbling uncontrollably, just walking. He moves along the sidewalk, passing buildings, navigating the city like someone who still has control. But there's something off, because while he's moving forward, he's also drifting, not in a straight line, not with purpose, more like someone caught between awareness and confusion. He checks his phone at one point. That moment becomes one of the most chilling details in the entire case, because investigators would later reveal that Riley attempted to send a message, but it never reached its destination. Instead, it sent the wrong contact. A small mistake, but one that suggests something important. His mind wasn't fully clear. From there, Riley continues walking. More cameras pick him up, different angles, different streets. And with each clip, something becomes more unsettling. No one stops him. No one intervenes. He's surrounded by people, but completely alone. At one point, he passes a police officer. He keeps walking. The officer doesn't engage. Why would they? To anyone watching, Riley probably looked like just another college student who had too much to drink. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Until you realize this is the last time anyone sees him clearly. Because after that moment, Rileystrain disappears. Not gradually, not with a traceable path. Just gone. His friends didn't panic immediately. At first, it seemed like a simple separation. Maybe he went back to the hotel. Maybe he found another group. Maybe his phone died. All reasonable explanations. But as time passed, those explanations started to fall apart. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. And Riley never returned. That's when concern turned into fear. The search began quickly. Authorities were notified. Surveillance footage was pulled. Witnesses were questioned. And what they found only deepened the mystery. Because Riley's last known path led toward the Cumberland River, a wide, dark stretch of water cutting through the city. It's a detail that instantly raises a terrifying possibility. But nothing about this case is that simple. Search teams combed the area. Drones scanned from above. Boats searched the water. Volunteers flooded the streets with flyers and questions. Everyone was looking for the same thing. Any sign, any clue, anything that could explain how a young man could vanish in the middle of a busy city. Then came the theories, and each one felt incomplete. Some believed Riley accidentally fell into the river. It would explain the direction he was heading. It would explain the sudden disappearance. But there were problems, because the footage doesn't show him stumbling toward danger. There's no clear moment where things go wrong. No indication of panic. Just walking. Others suggested foul play. That someone saw him alone, vulnerable, and took advantage of the situation. But again, there's no clear evidence. No suspicious figure following him. No recorded interaction that raises immediate alarms. It's as if he slipped through the cracks of reality itself. Then there's the timeline gap. The part of the night where cameras stop telling the story. Because in a city filled with surveillance, there's still a stretch where Riley isn't seen at all. And that gap is where everything could have happened. Or nothing. As days passed, the case began to attract national attention. Media coverage grew. Online discussions exploded. People analyzed every second of footage, every movement, every step, trying to find something that everyone else missed. But the more people looked, the stranger became, because nothing stood out. No defining moment, no clear turning point, just a series of normal actions leading to an abnormal ending. Riley's family arrived in Nashville, and that's when the emotional weight of the case truly settled in. Because for them, this wasn't a mystery. It was personal. A son, a brother, gone without explanation. They walked the same streets he did, watched the same footage, hoping to see something different, something that could tell them where he went, or why. But the footage doesn't give answers. It only raises more questions. Why was he walking alone for so long without help? Why didn't anyone stop him? Why did his phone activity suggest confusion? And most importantly, what happened in the moments we can't see? Because that's where the truth is hiding, not in what's visible, but in what's missing. And the deeper you look into this case, the harder it becomes to accept the simplest explanation. Because sometimes people don't just disappear. Sometimes they're taken, or led, or lost in ways that don't leave obvious traces. And rileystrain's story sits right at that uncomfortable intersection, where accident, vulnerability, and possibility all collide. But this is only the beginning, because what investigators uncovered next changes how you see that night completely. In the days that followed the disappearance of rileystrain, the case began to shift. At first, everything felt urgent, fast-moving, active. Search teams moved quickly. Law enforcement followed leads. Volunteers filled the streets. The city of Nashville seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to surface. But as the hours turned into days, that urgency started to fade into something heavier, uncertainty. Because despite the massive effort, nothing definitive was being found. No confirmed sightings. No direct evidence. No clear explanation. Just fragments. Investigators continued building Riley's last known movements. Second by second, they reviewed surveillance footage from businesses, traffic cameras, and street corners. They tracked his route as far as they could. And what they saw only reinforced one thing. Riley was alone, At no point did anyone appear to follow him closely. No confrontation. No visible threat. But there's something important about that kind of footage. It only shows what the camera can see. And sometimes what it doesn't capture matters more. One of the most unsettling details came from his phone activity. Investigators confirmed that Riley had attempted to contact someone shortly after leaving the bar, but the message didn't go where it was supposed to. It was sent to the wrong person entirely. That small mistake became a major point of focus because it suggested impairment. Not just physical, but mental confusion, disorientation, a lapse in awareness. And in a city like Nashville at night, even a moment of confusion can be dangerous. But how dangerous? That question led investigators back to the same place his path had pointed from the beginning, the Cumberland River. Dark, cold, unforgiving, running silently through the city. Search teams intensified their efforts there. Boats scanned the surface. Divers explored beneath it. Specialized equipment was brought in to detect anything unusual. For days they searched, and still nothing, which only made the situation more unsettling. Because if Riley had entered the water, there should have been signs, something to confirm it. But the river wasn't giving anything back. Meanwhile, online speculation grew louder. People questioned everything. The bar's decision to remove him, why he wasn't escorted safely, why his friends didn't immediately realize something was wrong, why no one intervened when he was clearly alone. And one question kept coming up again and again. How does someone disappear in a crowded city without anyone noticing? Riley's family began speaking publicly. Their voices carried a mix of hope and fear, holding on to the possibility that he was still out there, while preparing for something much harder. They urged anyone with information to come forward. Even the smallest detail could matter. A sighting, a memory, a moment that didn't seem important at the time. Because sometimes, cases like this don't break from major discoveries. They break from something small. Then, nearly 2 weeks after Riley vanished, something finally happened. Something that changed the entire direction of the case. On March 22nd, a body was discovered in the Cumberland River, not far from where Riley was last seen. It wasn't immediate confirmation, but the location, the timing, it all pointed toward one possibility. And soon after, that possibility became reality. The body was identified as rileystrain. The search was over, but the questions were not. For many, the discovery seemed to confirm the simplest theory, that Riley, disoriented and alone, had accidentally fallen into the river. It made sense on the surface. It aligned with his last known direction. It explained the sudden disappearance. But even then, there were things that didn't sit right, because accidents usually leave behind a clearer trail. A stumble caught on camera, a witness who saw something, a moment where everything changes. But in Riley's case, that moment was missing. There was no clear indication of when or how he entered the water, just an outcome without a visible cause. The official investigation continued. An autopsy was conducted. Authorities looked for signs of trauma, evidence of foul play, anything that could suggest something beyond an accident. But the findings didn't point toward a clear external cause. No obvious injuries indicating an attack. No evidence of a struggle. And yet, the absence of evidence didn't erase the unease surrounding the case. Because sometimes what officially concluded and what people feel are not the same. Toxicology reports added another layer. They confirmed that Riley had been drinking, but alcohol alone doesn't explain everything. It might explain the confusion, the misdirected message, the wandering path, but it doesn't fully explain how someone goes from walking through a crowded, well-lit city to ending up in a river without a single clear moment connecting those 2 points. And that gap, that missing piece of timeline, continues to define the case. Some believe it was a tragic accident, a combination of alcohol, disorientation, and unfortunate direction, a series of small decisions leading to a fatal outcome. Others aren't convinced. They point to the lack of clarity, the missing footage, the unanswered questions, the feeling that something doesn't quite add up. There are also broader concerns that this case brought into focus: the risks of nightlife environments, the responsibility of establishments when removing intoxicated individuals, the vulnerability of being alone in an unfamiliar city. Because Riley's situation isn't entirely unique. People get separated from their groups all the time. They walk alone. They lose their bearings. But most of them make it back. Riley didn't. And that's what makes this case linger. Not just the tragedy of what happened, but how easily it could happen. How quickly a normal night can turn into something irreversible. His family continues to remember him not as a case, but as a person, a young man with a future, with relationships, with moments that should have continued far beyond that night. And for them, the unanswered questions don't just fade with time. They stay, because closure doesn't always come from official conclusions. Sometimes it comes from understanding. And in this case, that understanding still feels incomplete. The footage still exists. Those final moments, Riley walking, alone, moving through the city, a sequence that feels ordinary until you realize what it leads to. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. There's no dramatic turning point, no obvious danger, no moment where everything clearly goes wrong. Just a gradual drift into the unknown, which forces one final question. Not about what happened after he disappeared, but about what we might have missed before it. Because sometimes the difference between safety and tragedy isn't a single event. It's a series of small moments. Moments where something could have been different, where someone could have stepped in, where a path could have changed. But those moments are invisible until it's too late. And rileystrain's story stands as a quiet reminder of that reality. A case that looks simple on the surface, but becomes more unsettling the longer you sit with it. Because in the end, we know where he was found. We know the official explanation. We know how the story ends. But the feeling remains that somewhere in that timeline, there's still something missing. And until that missing piece is truly understood, this case won't feel completely solved. Subscribe to Dark Truth, Unsolved Cases, for more stories that leave more questions and answers.